Ladies and gentlemen, we all know that relationships are the foundation of our lives, whether they're with family, friends, or that special person we hold dear. But here's a truth that is often overlooked. Ego can be the silent destroyer of the most beautiful connections. We live in a world where we're constantly told to assert ourselves, to fight for what we want, and to never back down. But when we bring that same attitude into our relationships, something powerful happens. We build walls instead of bridges. Ego creates distance in relationships by erecting invisible walls that prevent genuine connection between partners. In the early stages of a relationship, everything may seem perfect. The chemistry is palpable, and both individuals are fully invested in understanding and supporting each other. However, as time passes, the influence of ego can gradually start to interfere. At its core, ego is the part of us that is concerned with self-preservation and the need to be recognized, validated, and in control. It thrives on being right and dislikes vulnerability. When ego enters a relationship, it starts to take over interactions, making them less about connecting and more about winning or proving a point. Instead of listening to understand and empathize with the other person, the ego is constantly focused on its own needs and desires. This leads to misunderstandings, miscommunications, and often a sense of isolation, even when two people are physically close. One of the ways ego creates distance is by preventing us from being vulnerable. Vulnerability is a cornerstone of true intimacy because it allows us to reveal our true selves, including our flaws and insecurities. When ego takes precedence, we become guarded. We start to protect our pride at the expense of our emotional connection with the other person. We may withhold our feelings, avoid difficult conversations, or refuse to admit when we are wrong, all in an attempt to maintain control or avoid feeling weak. The more we do this, the more distant we become from our partner, even if we continue to live under the same roof. Additionally, ego breeds competition instead of collaboration. When each person is focused on asserting their own desires or being right, there is no room for compromise or cooperation. This creates an environment where each individual feels like they are constantly fighting for attention or validation. Instead of being partners who support each other, they become adversaries in a battle of egos. This competition makes it harder to resolve conflicts because both individuals are more concerned with protecting their own interests than finding a solution that benefits both. Over time, this erodes the trust and affection that once made the relationship strong, and the emotional distance grows wider. Another way ego creates distance is by causing us to hold on to past grievances. It's common in relationships for conflicts to arise, but the difference between healthy and unhealthy relationships is how those conflicts are handled. The ego tends to hold grudges, cling to past wrongs, and avoid forgiveness. Instead of focusing on healing and moving forward, ego convinces us that we must be right and justified in our anger or hurt. Holding on to these negative feelings creates a rift between partners, as it fosters resentment rather than understanding. The more we let ego dictate our responses, the harder it becomes to move past conflicts, and the emotional distance between us continues to widen. Ultimately, ego prevents us from truly seeing the other person as they are. We begin to see them through the lens of our own self-interest and desires, rather than as a unique individual with their own feelings, dreams, and vulnerabilities. The deeper the hold ego has on a relationship, the more disconnected we become from the person we once cared about. We stop hearing their needs, we stop understanding their perspective, and we stop empathizing with their struggles. The relationship, once full of warmth and connection, starts to feel cold and distant. The more we hold onto our egos, the less we are able to nurture the love and bond that originally brought us together. In relationships, ego is the silent force that gradually distances us from one another. By letting go of our egos, we allow space for understanding, forgiveness, and a deeper emotional connection. This is what truly sustains long-lasting love and harmony. Ego has a powerful ability to stop communication in relationships by creating barriers that hinder true dialogue. At its core, communication is about more than just exchanging words. It's about understanding, connection, and empathy. However, when ego enters the conversation, it shifts the focus from these meaningful aspects to the need for validation, being right, or protecting one's self-image. This subtle shift in focus is what causes communication to break down. When ego takes control, the primary goal in communication becomes winning the argument rather than understanding the other person's point of view. Instead of genuinely listening, individuals become preoccupied with what they want to say next or with how they can prove their point. This makes it difficult for partners to fully express themselves, as the space for mutual understanding is lost. The ego is always concerned with being seen as correct, and this need to be right stifles true dialogue. Communication becomes a contest rather than a collaborative exchange of thoughts and feelings. In relationships, the inability to communicate effectively due to ego can lead to a lack of emotional intimacy. When partners stop listening to each other with empathy and understanding, they miss out on the opportunity to connect on a deeper level. If both individuals are entrenched in their own egos, neither is willing to hear the other person's feelings, concerns, or needs. This can cause one person to feel unheard and unimportant, while the other feels frustrated and misunderstood. Over time, this lack of effective communication creates distance between the partners and erodes the emotional connection that is vital to maintaining a healthy relationship. Another way that ego stops communication is by leading individuals to avoid difficult conversations. Confronting issues such as unresolved conflict, emotional hurt, or differing expectations requires vulnerability and openness. However, ego thrives on avoiding situations that could expose weaknesses or flaws. Rather than addressing concerns head-on, people with inflated egos may deflect, dismiss, or avoid the conversation altogether. This avoidance only compounds the problem, as issues are left unresolved and the opportunity for genuine communication is lost. The longer this goes on, the more tension builds and the more communication becomes stifled by the weight of unspoken concerns. Additionally, ego can lead to defensiveness. When individuals feel their self-image is threatened, they naturally become defensive, often interrupting or responding with hostility rather than listening. A defensive response can shut down communication altogether, as it prevents any form of constructive dialogue. Instead of finding common ground or seeking to understand the other person's perspective, the conversation becomes a series of attacks and counterattacks. This results in a communication breakdown where neither party is willing to listen, and the conversation spirals into frustration and miscommunication. Ego also prevents honest self-expression. When we are concerned with how we are perceived, we may withhold our true thoughts or feelings out of fear of judgment or rejection. This lack of authenticity prevents the relationship from flourishing, as both partners are not fully being themselves. Authentic communication requires openness and honesty, but ego inhibits this process by making us more focused on managing our image and protecting our pride than on being genuine. Lastly, ego prevents us from taking responsibility for our own actions. In any relationship, there will be moments of disagreement or mistakes. However, when ego dominates, it becomes difficult to admit when we are wrong or take accountability for our actions. Instead of saying, "I'm sorry," or "I made a mistake," we might deflect blame or shift responsibility onto the other person. This not only stifles communication, but also prevents growth in the relationship, as both parties are unwilling to acknowledge their role in the issue. Ultimately, ego silences communication by creating barriers to understanding, preventing vulnerability, and fostering defensiveness. When both partners prioritize ego over connection, they are no longer engaging in meaningful communication, and the relationship suffers as a result. The key to breaking down these barriers is to let go of ego and embrace humility, empathy, and a willingness to listen. Only then can true communication and understanding thrive. Ego breeds conflict in relationships by fueling misunderstandings, increasing defensiveness, and preventing resolution. In the presence of ego, both individuals focus more on winning arguments and proving their points rather than solving problems or finding common ground. This creates an environment where disagreements escalate into heated arguments, often over trivial issues that could be resolved with mutual understanding. When each partner's ego is in charge, they become more invested in being right than in fostering harmony or growth within the relationship. One of the primary ways ego fuels conflict is by making each person more rigid in their perspective. Instead of being open to compromise or considering the other person's viewpoint, the ego convinces us that our perspective is the only valid one. This rigidity leads to a cycle of one-sided communication where neither person is willing to bend or understand the other. Even small disagreements can turn into large, unresolvable conflicts because each person is so caught up in defending their stance rather than finding a way to bridge the gap. Ego also heightens defensiveness. When our ego feels threatened or attacked, we instinctively want to protect ourselves, even if it means escalating the conflict. For example, if one partner offers criticism or points out a mistake, the ego might prompt the other person to react aggressively, dismissing the feedback or counterattacking. This defensiveness prevents the issue from being discussed rationally and only deepens the rift between the two individuals. The more defensive a person becomes, the harder it is for productive conversation to take place, and the conflict continues to spiral out of control. Another way ego breeds conflict is through blame shifting. When we allow our ego to control our reactions, we often find it easier to point fingers at our partner rather than taking responsibility for our own actions. Admitting faults requires humility, but ego thrives on avoiding vulnerability and ability and imperfect. By deflecting blame onto the other person, we avoid confronting our own mistakes and contribute to further tension in the relationship. This creates an environment where both partners are more focused on accusing each other than on resolving the underlying issue, perpetuating the conflict. Moreover, ego thrives on a sense of superiority and often leads to condescension. When one partner feels better than the other or believes they have more knowledge or experience, they may speak down to the other person or dismiss their opinions. This not only deepens the divide between the two individuals, but also fosters resentment, as the partner who is belittled feels disrespected and unheard. Such behavior prevents any real connection from forming and instead feeds the conflict with a sense of inequality and disrespect. Ultimately, the presence of ego in a relationship ensures that conflicts remain unresolved or escalate unnecessarily. Instead of focusing on solutions, both partners are preoccupied with protecting their self-image and asserting dominance. The result is a toxic cycle of fighting, blame, and hurt feelings that pushes both people further apart. To break this cycle, both individuals must recognize the destructive role of ego and be willing to let go of pride in favor of understanding, compromise, and mutual respect. Only then can conflicts be resolved in a healthy and constructive way, fostering a relationship built on trust and unity. Ego is a barrier to growth in relationships because it keeps individuals stuck in their ways, prevents personal development, and undermines the ability to adapt or change together. When ego is in control, the focus shifts from growth, understanding, and compromise to maintaining one's self-image or proving one's worth. This creates stagnation where both partners are unable to evolve individually or as a couple, thus limiting the potential for a deeper, more meaningful connection. In relationships, growth happens when both partners are open to learning from each other, acknowledging their mistakes and striving to become better versions of themselves. However, ego discourages this kind of growth by promoting a mindset of I'm already right or I don't need to change. When one or both individuals let their ego drive the relationship, they become less willing to consider their partner's perspective, learn from their mistakes, or take responsibility for their actions. This limits their capacity to evolve as people and as partners, stalling emotional growth and diminishing the overall strength of the relationship. Ego also prevents personal growth because it makes people resistant to feedback. Constructive criticism and honest feedback are essential for self-improvement, but ego perceives feedback as a threat. Instead of seeing it as an opportunity for growth, ego views it as an attack on one's self-worth. When partners are unwilling to accept feedback, they miss out on valuable opportunities to improve both themselves and the relationship. A healthy relationship requires an open mind and a willingness to adapt to each other's needs, but ego resists these changes because it thrives on comfort and control. Moreover, ego creates a competitive dynamic in relationships rather than a collaborative one. Instead of working together to overcome challenges or improve their bond, partners with strong egos may feel the need to compete or one-up each other. This creates unnecessary tension and hinders the development of a united front. Growth in a relationship happens when both individuals are aligned in their goals and are willing to help each other succeed. When ego takes over, this alignment breaks down, and each partner's individual desires may take precedence over the collective well-being of the relationship. The result is a lack of harmony and a sense that both individuals are working against each other instead of with each other. Ego also undermines emotional growth because it prevents vulnerability. Vulnerability is key to deepening emotional intimacy, as it allows both partners to open up about their fears, desires, insecurities, and dreams. However, ego keeps us guarded and defensive, fearing that showing weakness will be interpreted as a flaw or failure. Vulnerability requires courage, and without it, emotional growth stagnates. Instead of sharing openly, ego leads individuals to hide their true selves, putting up emotional walls that prevent the relationship from progressing to a deeper level. Furthermore, ego often leads to a desire for control, which can stunt both personal and relational growth. The need to control every aspect of life, from the relationship to individual decisions, creates a power imbalance that prevents both partners from growing as equals. A relationship should be a partnership based on trust, mutual respect, and shared decision-making. But when ego is in control, one partner may try to dominate the relationship, stifling the other person's ability to express themselves or contribute equally. This dynamic not only prevents individual growth, but also stifles the potential for a balanced and healthy relationship. Lastly, ego impedes the ability to forgive and move forward, which is essential for growth. Holding on to grudges, resentment, or past mistakes prevents healing. Ego holds on to the idea of being right, of not letting go of the past and not forgiving, even when it is necessary for the relationship to grow. By refusing to let go of hurt or pride, ego keeps both partners from moving forward and evolving. In order for both individuals to grow, they must be willing to forgive and leave the past behind. In summary, ego is a barrier to growth in relationships because it prevents openness, feedback, vulnerability, and collaboration. It keeps both individuals stuck in patterns that limit emotional, personal, and relational development. By letting go of ego and embracing humility, flexibility, and a willingness to change, both partners can create a space for true growth, both individually and as a couple. Only when ego is put aside can a relationship truly flourish and evolve over time. Ego builds barriers to empathy in relationships by creating a self-centered perspective that makes it difficult to understand or care about another person's emotions and needs. When we are consumed by our ego, we are often too focused on our own desires, fears, and insecurities to truly consider the feelings of others. As a result, the ability to empathize with a partner's struggles, joys, or concerns becomes diminished. This lack of empathy can have devastating consequences for the relationship, leading to misunderstandings, hurt feelings, and emotional distance. At its core, empathy is the ability to understand and share the feelings of another person. It requires us to step outside of our own emotional experience and see the world through someone else's eyes. However, when ego takes precedence, it creates a barrier between us and our partner, blocking our ability to connect emotionally. Instead of listening with an open heart, ego-driven individuals often listen with the intent to respond or argue rather than to understand. This makes the other person feel invalidated and unheard, which erodes the emotional connection between them. Ego also leads to a lack of active listening, which is a critical component of empathy. Active listening means being fully present in the moment, hearing not just the words being spoken, but also understanding the emotions behind them. When ego is involved, we often hear what is being said, but our minds are preoccupied with defending ourselves or formulating a counter-argument. This prevents us from truly absorbing the other person's perspective and feeling their emotions. We may think we know what the other person is experiencing, but we're actually just projecting our own assumptions or biases onto them, rather than genuinely understanding their point of view. In relationships where ego is dominant, partners are often more focused on their own needs and desires than on the needs of the other person. This selfishness prevents true empathy from flourishing, as it leaves little room for consideration of the other person's emotions or struggles. For example, when a partner is upset, an ego-driven individual might dismiss their feelings or tell them to get over it because they are more concerned with maintaining control or avoiding discomfort than offering emotional support. This lack of empathy creates a toxic cycle of disconnection, where both partners feel unsupported and emotionally isolated. Ego also creates an imbalance in the relationship, where one person's needs are prioritized over the others. Instead of seeing the relationship as a partnership of equals, ego sees it as a competition, with each person trying to get their own needs met. This dynamic is damaging because it prevents both individuals from understanding and responding to each other's emotions and concerns. Empathy is the foundation of mutual respect and understanding, but when ego is in control, it creates a one-sided relationship where both partners feel like they are not being truly seen or heard. Moreover, ego often leads to judgment and criticism, which further blocks empathy. When we are trapped in our ego, we are quick to judge others based on their actions, words, or mistakes without taking the time to understand their perspective. This judgment creates distance between partners as it fosters feelings of resentment and inadequacy. Instead of offering compassion, ego-driven individuals may criticize their partner for their weaknesses or failures, rather than empathizing with the challenges they are facing. This can lead to a toxic dynamic where both partners feel constantly judged, rejected, or misunderstood. Finally, ego makes it difficult to show vulnerability, which is essential for building empathy. Vulnerability is the willingness to be open about our emotions, insecurities, and struggles. When we are defensive or protective of our ego, we are less likely to be vulnerable with our partner. Without vulnerability, it becomes impossible to truly connect on a deeper emotional level, and empathy remains absent from the relationship. Without the willingness to show our own emotions, we also miss the opportunity to empathize with our partner's emotions. In this way, ego keeps us from fully engaging with each other's emotional experiences. In relationships, empathy is the key to building trust, intimacy, and understanding. However, when ego dominates, it creates a barrier that prevents both individuals from connecting emotionally. The more we let ego drive our actions and attitudes, the harder it becomes to empathize with our partner, which weakens the bond between us. The key to fostering empathy is to put ego aside and embrace humility, vulnerability, and an open heart. When we do this, we create a space for true emotional connection where both partners feel seen, heard, and understood. Only then can the relationship thrive on a foundation of mutual respect and compassion. Ego undermines trust in relationships by creating insecurity, suspicion, and a lack of vulnerability. Trust is the cornerstone of any strong relationship. It allows both partners to feel safe, supported, and valued. However, when ego is present, it causes people to act defensively, hide their true feelings, and protect their pride, all of which erode the trust that is essential for a healthy relationship. Trust is built on openness, honesty, and vulnerability, but ego forces individuals to hide their authentic selves, fearing judgment or rejection. This lack of transparency creates an environment where trust becomes difficult to establish and maintain. One of the ways ego undermines trust is by fostering dishonesty or withholding information. When we are concerned with maintaining our self-image or avoiding criticism, we may conceal certain truths or fail to express our genuine feelings. This dishonesty leads to a breakdown in communication, as the other partner is left wondering why certain things were not shared or why the truth was hidden. When trust is compromised by ego-driven behaviors, the relationship starts to feel less secure. Partners begin to question each other's intentions and motivations, leading to a growing sense of doubt and suspicion. Ego also fuels insecurity within relationships as individuals become overly concerned with their partner's thoughts, opinions, or actions. When ego dominates, one partner may feel constantly threatened by the other, worrying that they are not good enough or that they will be abandoned. This insecurity makes it difficult to trust the other person, as the fear of rejection or inadequacy becomes overwhelming. Instead of feeling confident in the strength of the relationship, one or more, both partners may constantly question the other's commitment, loyalty, or affection. This insecurity makes it challenging to build a strong foundation of trust, as both individuals are trapped in their own fears and doubts, unable to fully rely on each other. Moreover, ego prevents individuals from being vulnerable with their partner. Vulnerability is essential for creating emotional intimacy and trust because it requires one to open up and share personal thoughts, feelings, and experiences. When ego is in control, individuals become defensive and protective of their emotions, unwilling to expose their true selves for fear of being hurt or misunderstood. This lack of vulnerability creates a barrier that prevents deep emotional connection, as partners are unable to fully trust each other with their innermost thoughts and feelings. The more we hide behind our ego, the harder it becomes to trust our partner with the most intimate aspects of our lives. In addition, ego fosters a need for control, which can severely damage trust. When one partner is overly focused on controlling the other, the relationship becomes imbalanced and trust is undermined. Ego-driven individuals may try to dictate decisions, manipulate situations, or micromanage their partner's actions. This behavior creates a sense of distrust as the controlled partner feels that their autonomy is being undermined, and they begin to question the motives of the other person. Trust is rooted in equality and mutual respect, but when ego is in control, the power dynamic shifts, leading to feelings of oppression and betrayal. The lack of trust that results from this power imbalance can drive a wedge between partners, making it even harder to rebuild the relationship. Ego also leads to a reluctance to apologize or take responsibility for mistakes. Acknowledging when we are wrong and offering a genuine apology is essential for maintaining trust in a relationship. However, when ego is in control, we may be unwilling to admit fault, as doing so would threaten our self-image. Instead of seeking reconciliation, we may deflect blame or become defensive, which prevents trust from being rebuilt. Without the ability to own up to mistakes and show accountability, the foundation of trust begins to crumble, leaving the relationship vulnerable to further conflict and disconnection. Ultimately, ego creates an environment where trust becomes fragile and easily broken. Instead of fostering transparency, honesty, and mutual support, it cultivates dishonesty, insecurity, and defensiveness. Trust thrives in an atmosphere of openness and vulnerability, where both partners feel safe to express their true selves. By letting go of ego and embracing humility, honesty, and vulnerability, individuals can rebuild and strengthen the trust in their relationship. Only when ego is set aside can trust flourish, creating a secure foundation for a deeper, more connected partnership. Ego creates an unhealthy power dynamic in relationships by fostering competition, control, and imbalance. A healthy relationship thrives on equality, where both partners share responsibility, support each other, and contribute equally to the partnership. However, when ego enters the equation, it often skews this balance, turning the relationship into a contest rather than a collaboration. Each person becomes more focused on asserting dominance, proving their superiority or gaining control, instead of working together as equals. One of the most obvious ways ego creates a power imbalance is by causing individuals to compete rather than cooperate. When ego is in control, both partners may become obsessed with winning, whether it's over who is right in an argument, who has the most influence, or who can make the final decisions. This competitive dynamic prevents them from finding solutions that are mutually beneficial, as the goal becomes more about beating the other person rather than collaborating for the good of the relationship. A relationship should be a team effort where both individuals support each other and work toward common goals. But when ego takes over, this cooperative spirit is replaced by one of rivalry and conquest. Ego-driven behavior also leads to control issues, where one partner may try to dominate the other. This desire for control can manifest in subtle ways, such as trying to dictate decisions, manipulate situations, or even restrict the other person's independence. Control becomes a means of protecting one's self-image or maintaining a sense of superiority, and it stems from the fear of losing power or being vulnerable. However, this behavior ultimately undermines the foundation of the relationship, as it creates an imbalance where one person feels disempowered, unheard, and invisible. A healthy relationship is based on mutual respect and the freedom to express individual desires and opinions. When one partner's ego leads them to seek control, the other partner feels oppressed, which harms both their emotional well-being and the partnership itself. Moreover, ego can lead to an uneven distribution of responsibility in the relationship. One person may believe that their role, opinions, or actions are more important or superior to those of their partner, which can lead to a lack of collaboration and decision-making. This sense of superiority prevents an equitable partnership where both partners are equally responsible for the relationship's success and challenges. Instead of sharing the load, one partner may expect the other to conform to their desires or give in to their needs. This creates resentment and frustration as the controlled partner feels overlooked or disregarded, while the one seeking control becomes more entrenched in their ego-driven behavior. Ego can also interfere with emotional vulnerability, which is essential for a balanced, trusting relationship. Vulnerability involves exposing one's weaknesses, emotions, and fears, which requires both partners to be open and honest with each other. However, when ego dominates, individuals are less likely to be vulnerable, as they may fear judgment or rejection. Without vulnerability, emotional intimacy is stunted, and the relationship loses its depth. One partner may withdraw emotionally or become emotionally unavailable, refusing to share their true feelings, and this power imbalance can leave the other person feeling disconnected, lonely, or undervalued. Additionally, when ego drives a relationship, it can cause one partner to disregard the needs or desires of the other. Instead of listening and trying to understand each other's point of view, the ego-driven person may insist that their way is the only right way. This behavior fosters a lack of empathy and emotional connection, as the partner with less ego-driven behavior feels neglected, unheard, or ignored. Over time, this emotional neglect breeds resentment, and the power imbalance widens as both partners become more entrenched in their respective positions. Ultimately, an ego-driven power dynamic undermines the foundation of equality, mutual respect, and collaboration that is essential to a healthy relationship. The focus shifts from building a partnership based on love, understanding, and shared responsibility to a toxic cycle of competition, control, and manipulation. To create a healthy and balanced relationship, both partners must learn to let go of their egos and embrace a collaborative mindset where they share power equally, respect each other's autonomy, and prioritize the well-being of the relationship over individual dominance. By doing so, they can foster a space of mutual growth, understanding, and emotional connection. Ego destroys emotional intimacy in relationships by creating distance, fostering misunderstandings, and preventing genuine connection. Emotional intimacy is built on trust, vulnerability, and the ability to share one's deepest feelings, fears, and desires with another person. However, when ego is at the center of a relationship, it places barriers between partners, making it difficult to connect on a deeper emotional level. Instead of fostering closeness and understanding, ego creates a sense of separation, where each individual is more focused on protecting their pride than engaging with the other person's emotional needs. One of the key ways ego destroys emotional intimacy is by creating emotional walls between partners. When ego takes over, individuals often become defensive, afraid to show vulnerability or expose their true feelings. This fear of vulnerability arises because the ego convinces us that exposing our emotions is a weakness, or that being vulnerable might lead to rejection or judgment. As a result, partners with strong egos may hide their true selves, refusing to share their innermost thoughts, desires, or concerns. This creates a barrier that prevents emotional connection, as the relationship becomes surface level and lacks the depth that intimacy requires. Ego also leads to a lack of empathy, which is essential for emotional intimacy. Empathy involves the ability to understand and share the feelings of another person, and it fosters a sense of emotional closeness. However, when ego is dominant, individuals become so focused on their own needs, insecurities, and desires that they fail to truly listen to or understand their partner's emotional experience. Instead of offering emotional support, they may dismiss or invalidate their partner's feelings, creating further emotional distance. This lack of empathy not only hurts the partner, but also damages the relationship, as both individuals feel unsupported and misunderstood. Another way ego destroys emotional intimacy is by making people more self-centered and less attentive to their partner's emotional needs. When the ego takes charge, the relationship becomes more about personal validation and getting one's own needs met, rather than creating a nurturing environment for both partners to thrive emotionally. The focus shifts to maintaining one's self-image or proving one's worth, and as a result, one person may neglect the emotional needs of the other. This imbalance leads to emotional neglect, as the partner with the dominant ego becomes less attuned to the other person's emotions, leaving them feeling unsupported, unseen, and unloved. Moreover, ego can lead to a sense of competition in the relationship, which further inhibits emotional intimacy. When ego is involved, partners may feel the need to compete for attention, affection, or approval. This dynamic creates an environment where both individuals are more focused on winning in the relationship or being the superior partner, rather than working together to build emotional closeness. Instead of offering unconditional love and support, each person may try to outdo the other, leading to a lack of collaboration and emotional unity. This competitive mindset prevents both partners from experiencing the deep emotional connection that intimacy requires, as the relationship becomes more about individual gain than mutual support. Ego also undermines emotional intimacy by making it difficult to apologize or admit mistakes. Acknowledging one's flaws and taking responsibility for actions is a critical aspect of emotional intimacy, because it demonstrates humility, accountability, and a willingness to grow. However, when ego is present, it becomes much harder to admit fault. The fear of being seen as weak or inadequate prevents people from offering a sincere apology, which hinders the healing process. Without the ability to take responsibility for mistakes and offer heartfelt apologies, the relationship remains stuck in unresolved conflicts and emotional distance, preventing intimacy from flourishing. Ultimately, ego disrupts the foundation of emotional intimacy by preventing open communication, empathy, vulnerability, and emotional support. The more we let ego control our behavior, the harder it becomes to connect with our partner on a deep emotional level. To cultivate emotional intimacy, both partners must be willing to put aside their egos, embrace vulnerability, and prioritize the emotional well-being of the relationship over personal pride. Only when ego is left behind can true emotional closeness, trust, and connection be built, allowing the relationship to flourish in a meaningful and fulfilling way. Ego hinders personal growth within relationships by creating an environment where self-improvement is overshadowed by pride, defensiveness, and fear of vulnerability. Personal growth in a relationship requires both partners to evolve, learn from each other, and work together to become better versions of themselves. However, when ego is present, it blocks these opportunities for growth by fostering an attitude of stubbornness, resistance to change, and a refusal to acknowledge flaws, rather than embracing personal development. Individuals with a strong ego may be more focused on preserving their self-image or defending their actions, which limits their capacity for self-reflection and growth. One of the main ways ego hinders personal growth is by fostering an unwillingness to accept constructive criticism. A person with a dominant ego may take any form of feedback as a personal attack, seeing it as a threat to their self-worth or identity. Rather than viewing criticism as an opportunity for improvement, they react defensively, denying any possibility of needing to change. This refusal to accept feedback prevents them from learning valuable lessons that could help them grow as individuals and improve their relationship. Without the ability to see and acknowledge their own flaws, ego-driven individuals remain stagnant, unable to develop the emotional intelligence or self-awareness required for personal growth. Additionally, ego creates a barrier to self-reflection, which is essential for personal growth in a relationship. Self-reflection involves the ability to look inward, examine one's actions and behavior, and identify areas where improvement is needed. However, when ego is in control, individuals are often too focused on protecting their pride or maintaining a facade of perfection to engage in meaningful self-reflection. The ego convinces them that they are right or superior, which makes it difficult to acknowledge mistakes or weaknesses. This lack of self-awareness keeps them from growing as individuals and prevents the relationship from evolving in a positive direction. Ego also causes a fear of vulnerability, which stunts personal growth. Vulnerability is a crucial component of personal development, as it allows individuals to confront their fears, insecurities, and limitations. It requires humility and the willingness to embrace uncertainty and discomfort. However, when ego is present, individuals may avoid being vulnerable because they fear judgment, rejection, or appearing weak. This fear of vulnerability prevents them from fully engaging in the process of self-discovery and growth. In relationships, this lack of vulnerability leads to emotional stagnation, as partners are unable to share their true selves, express their needs, or work through their personal challenges. Without vulnerability, both individuals remain stuck in their old patterns and are unable to support each other in their growth journeys. Furthermore, ego prevents individuals from accepting responsibility for their actions and mistakes. Taking ownership of one's behavior is a vital step in personal growth, as it requires accountability and the willingness to make amends. However, ego-driven individuals often deflect blame, make excuses, or project their shortcomings onto others rather than accepting responsibility. This unwillingness to acknowledge their role in conflicts or challenges prevents them from learning from their mistakes and improving themselves. When both partners are unwilling to take responsibility for their actions, it leads to unresolved issues, frustration, and a lack of progress in the relationship. Ego also encourages a fixed mindset which hinders growth. A fixed mindset is the belief that one's abilities, intelligence, and personality traits are static and cannot be changed. Individuals with a strong ego often hold on to this mindset because they are afraid of appearing imperfect or vulnerable. They may avoid challenges that could expose their weaknesses and may resist change out of fear that it will make them seem inadequate. In contrast, a growth mindset, the belief that abilities and traits can be developed through effort, learning, and perseverance, fosters personal growth. When ego dominates, however, the fixed mindset prevails, making it difficult to embrace the challenges and changes that come with growth. Moreover, ego leads to comparisons which inhibit personal growth in relationships. When one partner's ego is constantly comparing themselves to the other, they may become focused on competition rather than collaboration. This mindset fosters feelings of inadequacy, jealousy, or resentment, as one person feels inferior or threatened by the other's achievements. Rather than supporting each other's growth, they become focused on outdoing the other, which prevents both individuals from realizing their full potential. Personal growth is a journey that should be celebrated together, but when ego is at play, the focus shifts from mutual support to rivalry. Lastly, ego can lead to a fear of failure, which prevents individuals from taking risks or stepping outside their comfort zones. Personal growth often requires trying new things, making mistakes, and learning from those experiences. However, when ego is present, the fear of failure becomes overwhelming, as individuals worry about how they will be perceived or whether they will live up to expectations. This fear of failure leads to stagnation, as individuals become too afraid to take the necessary steps toward growth. Without the willingness to fail and learn, personal development remains limited. Ultimately, ego obstructs personal growth by creating a defensive, rigid, and fear-based mindset that resists change, feedback, and vulnerability. To experience true personal growth in a relationship, both partners must be willing to set aside their egos and embrace humility, openness, and the willingness to learn and evolve. Only by doing so can they support each other's growth, enhance their emotional connection, and create a relationship that thrives on mutual development and shared experiences. So I challenge you today to think, are you bringing your ego into your relationships? If so, it's time to let it go. Humble yourself, open your heart, and choose love over pride. Because when ego leaves, love enters. And that's when magic happens. Thank you.